Vladimir Kara-Murza is a very prominent and one of the most known outspoken critics of Putin's regime. He's known everywhere in the world for many, many years for his position. And he was Free Russia Foundation vice president until last year. But since he goes to Russia, he lives in Russia, and we couldn't, because of all this repressive legislation, we couldn't continue our working relationship, but we of course are friends and supporters and like-minded people for many, many years. What happened yesterday was that he was coming back home to his Moscow apartment from meetings with his friends and partners on this anti-war movement, and he was stopped by police, and he was detained, and he spent his night in the OVD Hamovniki, which is notorious for its illegal detentions and quite brutal treatment of detained people by the policemen, and he spent the entire night in this over there police station. His lawyer, Vadim Prokhorov, who is his lawyer for many years, who was a lawyer for Russian slain opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, who is also a main and the only lawyer on Boris Nemtsov murder case, representing his daughter Zhana Nemtsova. So Vladimir Kara-Murza's lawyer, Vadim Prokhorov, wasn't able to see him, his client, which is of course unconstitutional. All people who are detained have the right to see their to be represented by their lawyers, but have the legal counsel, and even in this completely illegal and unconstitutional Russian constitution, even according to that document, this is a right of every person to have a lawyer. Anyway, he was charged with the article, administrative article 19.3, which means disobedience to the police, which is also, of course, a nonsense, because he wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't, of course, disobeying the police. And it was a very fast trial today, which again, quite unusual, but more and more typical in recent times, probably since the arrest of Alexei Navalny, because usually it would take several days to prepare for the trial, but this time it was held the next day after the detention. And the sentence is 15 days. It's a full amount according to this article, so 15 days in jail. And what we see more and more, again, it's in this judiciary, so-called judiciary, more and more Kafkian style, when again they call that like voice peace is war and freedom is unfreedom and all this stuff. Yes, we saw that he was charged, he was disobeying the police by changing the trajectory. Which is quite metaphorical, I would say, because he was actually parking. He was doing the same thing he was doing every day. He parked his car in front of his entrance, and he was entering his entrance of the apartment building where he lives. So that was the only thing he was doing. And so, of course, we understand that the real reason is Vladimir's position, especially anti-war position, because according to the Russian legislation, newly adopted Russian legislation, you cannot even call it the war. You can be in jail for 15 years just calling it the war. You should only refer to this as a special operation, and Vladimir is very outspoken on that. So this is the real reason to silence the Kremlin's opponents.
Let me ask you a few questions for brief answers. How is he doing?
He's fine. His lawyer saw him today during the trial. Of course, his speech was very powerful. He was again saying, naming names. He was saying the real reason why he's detained, and of course, he wasn't agreeing with the sentence or with the charges, with the policy of the state and all that. So he's fine.
Okay, so he's been poisoned twice already
Yes.
by Russian agents. Is he, are others concerned that this might happen again because of this?
Yes, it's one of our concerns. Of course, he hasn't fully recovered. But I think it's impossible to fully recover from these terrible poisonings. But also, it's not only this 15-day arrest. For now, what we are all concerned about is that this is that the authorities will use this time to prepare a more serious criminal case against him. And this is like the biggest concern because if they wanted just to threaten him, they would probably, the charge would be, the sentence would be like smaller, maybe 10 or 12 days, 7 days, whatever. But this is a full amount that he can receive under this article, 15 days. Plus, he had a return ticket. He was going to go back, see his family, and do other stuff like in the US and Europe. And so he was supposed to travel. And this is a very big concern that he wasn't allowed to leave the country. And instead, he was detained. And now he has this 15-day arrest.
What do you think, based on what you know about this war, what you know about Vladimir Putin's mindset or what he's doing, some of the activities, he's seems to be very paranoid. And I'm wondering how you think this will impact Mr. Kara-Murza and others like Navalny and, your organization and other people in Russia that oppose him. I'm curious to know what you think, how far you think this goes.
Well, when we saw this military build-up, and I think we talked about that, we really didn't believe that this full-scale invasion is even possible because it's not beneficial for the Kremlin, first of all. We really believed and hoped that all this was just to bluff the muscles and blackmail the West, disrupt Ukraine and mobilize the domestic audience. But again, or maybe there could be some limited military operations in the east of Ukraine, which never stopped. For us, the war didn't start on February 24th, 2022. The war started 8 years ago with the annexation of Crimea, with invasion to eastern Ukraine. But of course, what happened on February 24th was a new stage in this fuller scale stage in this war. So it was, on the one hand, surprising because, again, we hoped that Putin understands the consequences of his action. It was, I think, and I believe it was suicidal for him. If we always knew that his regime has its expiration date, I think by invading, attacking Ukraine, the regime expedited its expiration date. It's obvious for the entire world now what this regime is. And we also, what we see is not the war of Russia against Ukraine, is the war of the dictatorship against the democratic world. And what we also saw that in all these calculations and all this forecasts, what we always were saying, what we don't know is the level of insanity of Putin, the level, we always knew his level of brutality. And on the other hand, what is happening is quite logical. This is how Putin started his going to power, by blowing up apartment buildings in Moscow. And there was a war in Georgia in 2008. There was this annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the invasion of eastern Ukraine. So everything what it was like, again, the regime was becoming more and more brutal, more and more radical, more and more insane. And this is, on the other hand, is again quite logical. But what we hoped, again, that they also understand that all the sanctions, everything else, the unity of the entire world, the strength of Ukraine, absolutely, like of all and each Ukrainian, starting from, of course, absolutely brave leadership of President Zelensky to just ordinary people, when just a woman can destroy a Russian drone by just a jar of pickles. And so this is, of course, President Putin didn't calculate, didn't and underestimate it. So what about your question? What our concerns? Yes, we are concerned that now the Putin and his regime, they don't need to imitate anything any longer. They can be as brutal as they want. They can murder even more people. They can murder Navalny. They can do absolutely anything to anybody, be it, so again, known people or ordinary people. Just doesn't matter for them.
Final question. What's your message to the West, the US, NATO, the EU, all of those countries that are allies of Ukraine?
I would repeat that it's not the war of Russia against Ukraine, and that's why it should touch everybody. It relates to everybody, to all countries, to the US, to the European Union, to the NATO, because again, it's the war of the dictatorship against the democratic world, and in Putin's mind, he's already fighting Americans, first of all, and NATO. This was the main reason why he even started to attack Ukraine 8 years ago, and now saying that he's fighting with Nazis installed by Americans. The war is already here everywhere in the entire democratic world. And it won't stop with Ukraine. Putin will go further, and I think he wouldn't even care about Article 5 or anything else if any other country, if it's be it Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, or anything else, he wouldn't care if it's a EU country, if it's a NATO country. Plus, we already see all the use of the chemical weapons, all the banned weapons in Ukraine, and more threats of nuclear strikes. So again, the war is already here everywhere, and this is up to the democratic world to defend itself. So this is the main message.
Natalia Arno, thank you so much for this. This context is very important right now, and we wish the best for our friend and your colleague, Vladimir Kara-Murza, and we hope to stay in touch with you on that.
Thank you so much.